Nick and I had to isolate ourselves. Not only because we had to stay up for 72 hours straight, but because we were scared we might spread what we had to others. Neither of us knew what this sore thing might do to us, but if 72 hours of being awake was what was necessary to keep us and others from getting sick, we were gonna do it. Luckily, the weekend was just around the corner. A couple of us had Memorial Day off. Nick managed to get a hold of Reggie, who could cover his shift in return for Nick taking a shift on Independence Day. Fair deal. So with a 3-day weekend, we had our work cut out for us. Caffeine was a given, but Nick also had to get some heavier stuff. The kind of thing that gets your heart racing to Levisol it shouldn't. I'm not gonna go into detail, but we needed a serious push to get past those last few hours. Remember, both of us had already been up for a full day when we first got exposed to this thing, so we were looking at almost 4 whole days, and no preparation. We made the best of it. We played games, we ate takeout, we set new records on Nick's old Guitar Hero games that he dug out of storage. The plastic guitars were a bit stiff and sun-yellowed, but they worked just fine most of the time. The green button would get a bit stuck though. We went for walks, we took turns taking cold showers, we had a spontaneous karaoke thing going on in the living room, anything we could to keep the ball rolling and our eyes open. Sometimes I'd almost fall asleep standing up. Just leaning against a wall was bad enough. My knees would lock into place, and my body would slump a little. That's when Nick would shake me back to life. I had to get him a couple of times too. He once laid down face first on the couch, and I immediately flipped it over, almost wrecking his coffee table as he came tumbling down. It was stupid, but we had to be stupid to make it through this. We'd been up for over 40 hours, and neither of us were making sense. We were out for a walk, hearing the frogs croak in the distance. The sun had just set, but we could still see the light peeking over the horizon. We tried to keep a good pace, but we could both feel it, we were slowing down. I had to keep us focused on something, so I brought up the first thing that came to mind. Your wife left you for a Salt Lake City stripper? Yup, Nick nodded. Had the biceps and the stomach thing and all of it. They still together? What? No, he laughed. They were never together. But she tried, you know. I'm not following. She went for the guy. She called me up, said it was over, and went for the guy in this big, romantic hullabaloo. And he blew her off. He was gay, Nick shrugged. So it wasn't really like that. Nick looked up, as if counting the stars. He sighed. The bags under his eyes looked darker than usual. I guess when you've seen the greener grass, everything else starts to look gross, right? You ain't gross, Nick. You're just another kind of grass. Sorta, bluegrass, you know. Bluegrass, he chuckled. I like that. Bluegrass kinda guy. Those last few hours, we ended up watching reruns of Family Matters and chugging Four Loko. I had the Swedish fish flavor. Nick knew a guy with boxes of the stuff. It was vile, but we had to get over those last few hours. Nick was pacing back and forth but was tired enough to almost fall over. Done, Nick slurred. I'm done. It's 2 hours. You can do 2 hours, I assured him. You can do it. I'm gonna go stick my head in the freezer. He did just as he said and stuck his head in the freezer. I was trying to keep up with the Winslows and their goofy adventures, but it was hard to pay attention. I had to fill in the blanks a lot, and it didn't make a lot of sense. I barely registered the strange colors on screen as Steve Urkel. You know what we can do? Nick said. We can prep. What do you mean? We can make it comfortable. I'm gonna make my bed with all new stuff, you can crash out here. And we get like, tea. And ice water, for when we wake up. And I get, like, scented candles. And we put on whale song, and dash. And we sleep like goddamn, royalty, I added. Right. Yeah, he nodded, getting more enthusiastic. Yeah, that. So we got to work. Nick prepped his bed, and I went to his car to get a couple of extra blankets for the couch. Problem was, those were really soft blankets, and there was something about the back seat of his car that calmed me. Maybe the smell and feel of the synthetic leather. So I crawled in the back seat. There was a cold wind blowing, so I closed the door. And in that silence, I figured, what's 1 hour? It'd just be an hour. Would that really be so bad? And so, I crashed in the back seat of his car. I was out for 14 hours. Nick got about 12. I woke up with a massive headache, but the ice water that Nick had prepped helped a little. I'd made us a couple of sandwiches. I thanked the pastas for thinking ahead, as the two of us prepped for work. By all metrics, we ought to have been fine. 72 hours had passed. Nick drove me to work, my car was still back at my place. The conversation dulled as I chugged a full bottle of ice water, pouring the last few drops on my face. Nick looked like he'd been trampled by some kind of depressed parade. Even his hair looked tired. "We're not doing that again," I said. "No, we're not," Nick agreed. "So we're dropping this." I didn't answer. I had pulled Nick into some bad thing one time too many. And yeah, the ends justify the means. I was looking for this lost girl, and I'd stumbled upon the very thing that got her lost in the first place. Nick looked over at me and sighed. He took a moment to choose his words. "I get it," he finally said. "You wanted to help. You still do. But let's think about it. Let's be careful. If you want me to back off, you gotta promise me something, Nick." He rolled his eyes, then looked at me. I wasn't joking, and he could tell. With a sigh, he nodded. "You gotta promise me that if you pick up any lead, whatsoever, on Adam's missing girl, you're telling me. You can call the shots, but there's gotta be shots to call. I'm not the only one here to serve and protect, right?" Nick tasted the words, throwing a glance in the rearview mirror. "All right," he said. "Deal." It took us a full work week to get back on our feet. My sleep schedule was a joke. One night I'd be in bed by 6, another night I couldn't sleep at all. I'd zone out at work, missing a word every now and then, much like I'd miss the story beats on Family Matters. I'd lag behind a bit, trying to piece together the context and make it make sense. As I slowly got my routine back in order, May rolled into June. We started getting some proper heat. People were talking about a dry season, with no hint of rain for a long time to come. They weren't wrong, there wouldn't be a drop of water for 2.5 weeks. Midway through June, I was back on patrol duty. Charlie and Reggie were back to covering dispatch. Nick and I were on the same team, courtesy of a thankfully short conversation with Sheriff Mason. I got the impression that the DUC were backing off, like some kind of situation had sort of resolved itself, seemingly. I was on my way home from a particularly rough shift. A couple of tourists had tried to shoplift from the local grocery store. After resisting arrest and racking up 2 counts of obstruction, they managed to fail themselves all the way into a felony charge. Hysterical people were part of the job, but they were a bad part of the job. But yeah, Tom Skog doesn't have a lot of those. It was nice to have something regular to do, for once. Coming home from that shift, I felt like things were getting back to normal. The first drops of rain spattered against the hood of my car as I pulled into the driveway of my house. The moment I stepped outside, it felt like bliss. The water was cooling. Reassuring, in a way. Like Mother Earth was whispering to me that things were gonna be okay. I just stopped for a second, put down my groceries, and basked in it. I found myself with my arms outstretched, and my mouth wide open, just drinking it all in. I stood there for 35 minutes. I'm not gonna lie, that was worrisome. Up until that point, I'd been fine. Could that 1 hour of sore linger in your system that long? Could that be what caused it? I tried to rationalize it, thinking I was overreacting. But in Tom Skog, there's no such thing as overreacting. If anything, people tended to shove life-threatening thing under the rug way too fast, myself included. So just to make sure, I gave Nick a call, explaining what I'd done. "Yeah, that's a symptom," he said. "But I think some folks would just sort of stop at that, especially at the ass end of things. So it could mean that's the last of it?" I asked. "Like it's out of my system?" "Sure, yeah. It could. It's like when you get a bad cold. You get a runny nose, you get a headache, but that's just your body fighting it off. This is sort of like that. So what do I do? Keep an eye on it. And if it gets worse, we do something." "Do what?" Nick was quiet. I looked back at my still-packed groceries, pacing restlessly. Do what, Nick? Something. I dunno. There were a couple of signs that things weren't okay, but they were harder to spot than you might imagine. It is only later, when I looked back on this time, that I realized these weren't really normal things. For example, automatic doors stopped working. They'd close on me seemingly at random, as if they didn't register that I was really there. It got annoying after a while, and I even got my foot stuck at one point. Another thing was the water. No matter how hot I set the water to, it would end up going cold after a couple of seconds. I had to start taking really short showers. I called a plumber on 2 separate occasions, and both times they assured me that nothing was wrong. Then there were the birds. There were just a handful of them, but I'd start to spot these bright red birds circling outside. They'd flee and scatter at the sight of me, but I'd never seen them before. They weren't native to the area. In and of themselves, these events would just be weird happenstances, but in the context of being exposed to something I didn't understand, they had to be connected. Then there was that one morning. I got to work, used the bathroom, and as I washed my hands I looked up to see my reflection. As I did, I watched it turn to ash. The skin looked like it sagged off my face and evaporated into dust, leaving a blackened charcoal-like skull behind. Empty sockets leaving a dead, empty stare. I tried to blink it away, but the image wouldn't disappear. I would turn my head, and as I did, the reflection would do the same, until decay caused the skull to detach and roll off the shoulder. As it did, the light flickered. There was a sound. I expected a thud, but it was something darker, more rumbling. Like a drawn-out hello. I ran out, grabbed Nick by the arm, and got out of the station. I got a lot of weird looks that day, but I'd started to get a bit of a reputation as a wild card anyway. At least I wasn't just a rookie. Nick pulled himself free, looking me up and down. It took him a couple of seconds to soften his expression. "It's getting worse?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "A lot. Look, the only one I can think of that would know something about this is Digman, and that fucker." "What?" I said. "Don't we have guys on surveillance? He's been gone for weeks. Suspected dead." "Dead?" I scoffed. "How are we not talking about this?" "It's not been confirmed or anything," Nick shrugged. "There's no body. So what the hell do we do then?" Nick paced a little, adjusting his pink sunglasses. Looking back at the station, I could see we had a bit of an audience. "We could get the DUC, I suggested. They study this, right?" "You'd go away," Nick said, shaking his head. "Permanently." Nick looked around, as if expecting to see an answer in our immediate vicinity. Either that, or he was having trouble keeping eye contact. "I don't know," Nick said. "There's this one thing that's sort of a cure-all kinda deal, but it's dumb. Real dumb. Like, actual dumb." "Nick, what are you suggesting?" "Look, if you can hold on, and I'm not suggesting anything else, you could, technically dash." "For fuck's sake, Nick, spit it out." He rolled his eyes, and he threw out his arms in surrender. "You could do a year walk. Same thing as Digman. You would have to make it till New Year's, and then a whole other year, but I've seen it done. It's an absolutely insane thing, but it can do anything." "When you say anything, what exactly do you mean?" Nick lowered his glasses and his voice. "It can literally bring the dead back to life. I'd bet my life that it could wipe away whatever you got in your system. That's like chopping off your neck 'cause you got a headache." "I'm just saying," Nick clarified. "There's always a backup plan. Things would escalate from there." The next time it rained, just a couple of days later, I lost 1.5 hours. I stepped outside and blacked out, waking up with a mouthful of rainwater. I started having nightmares. I'd have no idea what about, I'd just wake up with a cold sweat and a heart-pounding panic. I knew it was bad, but I didn't know why. Sometimes, there'd be bruises. And this one time, I woke up with an awful stomach cramp. I rushed to the bathroom, thinking I had indigestion, when I tripped on the threshold. I landed stomach first on the bathroom tiles, and there was this fullness in my throat that just spurted out. I coughed up about half a dozen thin white strings. It was just the end of them, they were still attached to me. I could feel them moving in my throat. I tried pulling them out, but the cramp sent this shockwave of pain through me, like the strands had roots in my gut. It felt like pulling them out might kill me. I got up off the floor and grabbed some nail clippers. Taking a single strand, I clipped it off. I got this intense pain in my chest, like my heart didn't know what to do. It felt like I'd been stabbed, or lost a tooth. There was this sharp, cutting pain, curling all the way from my throat down to the base of my spine. I just stood there, having these white strands hanging from the edge of my lips, like I'd swallowed a cheap wig. There was only one option. I leaned my head back and slowly, but surely, swallowed. I spent the better part of an hour on that bathroom floor, clutching my stomach. I thought about getting in the shower, but it'd just be too cold. A single dead strand of white lay in the sink, stinking of chlorine and ammonia. It was so acidic that it discolored the ceramic with a tinge of blue. Later that night, I spent time going through Adam's notes. The man had been researching SOAR for some time, and although his notes made little sense, I figured there might be something in there that I'd missed. Flipping page after page after page, I lulled myself into this semi-hypnotic state. Handwritten notes took ages to read. The notes were mostly focused on what he thought his daughter Elizabeth had been exposed to, but he was making an attempt to piece together info about the condition itself as well. And that was the scariest thing, it was never a disease, or an infection. It was a condition. Every page all but confirmed that SOAR didn't destroy or introduce anything to the body. It escalated something we already contained. It meant that whatever effect SOAR was triggering had a universal component already present in every single human. And, according to Adam's notes, a handful of other creatures. Lions, most notably, and certain kinds of fish. Falling asleep over the notebooks, I barely even read anymore. I just saw the pages flip. But there was something off. I was holding my head up with my left hand and checking my phone with my right. So how was I turning the page? Something cold retracted down my throat. It felt like swallowing a sort of tasteless, gelatinous yogurt. Soft, boneless, and chunky. I fell out of my seat, tapping my body. My chest, my stomach, my head. I was okay. I wasn't even nauseous. But my heart was racing like a steam engine, and I could feel a strange weight in the pit of my stomach. Like I was full, but without eating. Something was pressing against my organs, albeit ever so gently. I picked up the phone and called Nick. I ran into my bathroom, looking at myself in the mirror. I looked normal. I was okay. Yeah. Nick answered. It's worse, I huffed. It's so much worse. I can be there in 15. Please. Are you gonna tell me what's dash? I made this ungodly noise, like I was bracing for a sneeze. But instead of a sneeze, I felt something rooted in my stomach shoot itself out of my throat. A white tentacle-like appendage slapped my phone out of my hands, sending it across the room. The reflection in the mirror was still standing as I fell to the floor. It was turning to ash, and reaching its hands towards the appendage, almost like a greeting, or an invitation. The two reached towards one another. I grasped the thing coming out of my throat, but it was slippery. It felt like trying to strangle a soap. I couldn't think straight. What was I even fighting? What was happening to me? Rushing towards the door, I caught a final glimpse of that reflection. It wasn't just a decaying me reaching out, there was something behind it. Something impossibly dark, guiding its arm. Like a tutor teaching a pupil. It reminded me of how my mom had stood behind me at the shooting range when I was a teenager. A memory that, up until that point, had been nothing but positive. Crashing through the door, I stumbled through the living room, dragging the exposed white appendage behind me like an unfriendly dog on a leash. I tried leaning my head back and swallowing, forcing it back down my throat, but I just ended up gagging on air. It was straining itself, testing the roots in the pit of my stomach. It struggled, knocking over a couple of chairs as it twitched and slithered back and forth on the floor. I leaned back against the wall, bracing myself to pull. It was gonna hurt like hell, but I had no choice. Then, I accidentally hit the light switch. All of a sudden, it retracted. It rolled back down my throat like a measuring tape, snapping hard enough that it tapped the tip of my nose going down. Kinda like the spaghetti scene in Lady and the Tramp, another memory forever spoiled by that nightmarish thing. I waited by the door, in the light. I didn't know what to do. I was getting worse by the day, and there was no doubt in my mind that it was a sore thing anymore. There'd been illustrations in Adam's notebooks. Descriptions. Hell, I'd seen the thing burst out of him that night in May, just before Nick and I killed him and set fire to his remains. I was screwed. There was no other way to say it. Going to the DUC would put everyone under investigation, and I'd be gone. Staying with Nick could mean infecting others. When Nick pulled up, I walked out the door and held up a hand. I had no idea what I was gonna do or say, but I couldn't put him in danger again. SOR could spread at minimum contact, and there was no way I could control it. I had no idea if a sneeze or light touch could infect him. I had to keep my distance. "You okay?" he asked, stepping out of the car. You got anything?" I asked. "Any solutions?" "Not yet," he admitted. "But I think our best bet is to go hunting for Digman. They say he's gone, but he's a slippery thing. I don't think he could die if he wanted to." Yeah, I nodded. "Sounds good." You don't look okay," Nick blurted out. "I mean, you got that heroin chic thing going on, but it's like, more heroin than chic." "I'll be good, Nick." There was something about my tone made him quiet down. We looked at one another in silence, considering the weight of our words. "It's real bad, huh?" I nodded. I looked down. Usually, Nick could fix things. He could help me, or I could help him. But this time, my partner was as helpless as I was. "I think you should go, Nick," I said. "You can get sick." "I'm serious, Nick." He looked at me with his arms crossed. I hadn't even noticed how he hadn't brought his trademark pink sunglasses. "What are you gonna do?" he asked. "I dunno," I shrugged. "But you gotta go." "I can't. I can't control it." "Are you asking or telling me?" "I'm asking." He bit his lip, putting his hands at his sides. He wanted to say something else, but he couldn't. He just gave me this look, like he was asking me to reconsider. I just shook my head at him. He reluctantly got back in his car. And to his credit, he did as I asked. He left. I packed some things. Mostly notebooks, some clothes, and cash. I locked the place up, got in my car, and drove. I couldn't stick around where I might hurt someone. At the end of the day, it was still about protect and serve. I tried not to look in the rearview mirror, or the side mirrors. It felt like something was off, like they weren't really showing me what they should. There was that feeling that a tiny tilt would show me something I didn't want to see. I'd have to blink away things that weren't there. I'd see shapes lining the side of the road. I'd feel something in my stomach twist and turn, as if commanded by something to act. I bit down hard, making sure my teeth touched, and put a hand in front of my mouth. But it didn't help for long. Something tickled my nose instead. I remember thinking, no. That's all I was thinking. Streetlights were passing me by as I sped up. As I got further out of town, the streetlights made way for worse and worse dirt roads, leading me into spaces the Tomskog folks rarely went. I didn't really think about it. If that's what it was gonna be, that's what it was gonna be. I'd see humanoid shapes on the sides. Darkened, charcoal-like things, like the decay I'd seen looking back at me in the mirror. I could taste the sourness in my mouth as something struggled to be freed, and I could see things moving in the mirrors at the edge of my peripheral. I was doing something it didn't want, and it was gonna let me know. It wanted to be around people. It wanted to meet others. Forget that. My car shook. Even with a seatbelt, I smacked my head against the roof of the car as I hit a rock. I almost lost my steering. I had to pull the handbrake, coming to a full stop. As my body shot forward, the car screeched to a halt. The second my body thumped against the seatbelt, little white strands shot out of my whole face. A tickle in my eyes and nose. Something between my teeth. Something running out of my ears like a bad earwax. The strands were almost 2 feet long now, scattered across the dashboard, moving independently of one another. Chlorine and ammonia. The smell was overwhelming, and for a moment, I just sat there. I was afraid to move, thinking I was a sudden jerk away from excruciating pain. I slowly pulled my head back and turned the car off. I just sat there with my face feeling like a leaking lemon. Was this the end stage? Was I about to lose my mind, like Adam had? I looked up to see my reflection in the rearview mirror. It hurt when I blinked. Little strands of white were moving my eyelashes, forcing me to blink over and over. I was expecting to see some horrific vision, but all I saw was myself. That was bad enough. Looking out into the dark, I could see silhouettes. Things as dark as decay, moving closer. An army, asking me to join. Something horrible and primal, bringing out the worst in me, making it spill out like an overflowing bowl. I got out of the car and brought my flashlight. If light messed with these things, I'd mess with them all the way to my grave. I kept going down the broken dirt road by foot, desperate to get as far away as possible. I saw an old sign saying St. Gall, but I had no reference to what that might mean. There was no place on the map with that name. Maybe I was just distracted. I think I'd heard it mentioned a couple of times. My light would land on things. Things peeking out behind trees. Things moving in the grass. Distant whispers. Interested parties taking note. A drop of blood ran from my nose. I was having trouble concentrating. I couldn't remember the name of the Winslows anymore. Did I even like Family Matters? Was that even a TV show? I fell to my knees. I couldn't keep up with thinking and moving at once, so I settled for thinking. I sat there on my knees, confounded and confused. I didn't even notice me turning the flashlight off, embracing the dark. I remember looking up and seeing something massive coming towards me. It didn't make a sound. It was just this presence, hollow and immense. When it finally spoke, it was as if spoken from behind a pane of glass. Resonating, vibrating. Trying to break through. Hello. I waved back, one finger at a time, like I was drumming on an invisible dashboard. Hello, I said. How are you? It reached for me, and the things inside me reached back. Like extending for a handshake. Someone welcoming an old friend. A promise of something horrible to come. I was just the broken shell of a snail, waiting to be replaced. White strands raised themselves out of me. Something large adjusted itself, causing me to almost tip over. I tried pulling back, but there was no point. Not only was I exhausted, but I didn't understand what I was fighting against. But I remember laughing out loud. Because, despite knowing I was about to die, that something would be torn from me, a thought crossed my mind. Carl Winslow was the dad on Family Matters. And in that moment, I knew that this thing hadn't really won. Not yet. I could still think. I gathered whatever thoughts I could muster and directed it into a tiny little movement. I twitched my thumb, and the flashlight came back on. I'd been holding it on the ground, and it lit up my face like I was a kid telling a scary story. My face burned as it retreated into me, like a rabbit diving for its burrow. I was left with these chemical streaks across my face, and this awful tickle in my throat. But for a brief moment, there was nothing there. It was just a nice summer night, with frogs croaking in the distance, and the stars as bright as ever. Miss, are you harmed? I turned around to see someone coming down the road. A nice-looking woman in a blue kaftan. She got closer, and I wanted to keep my distance, but I physically couldn't. I can't imagine what I must have looked like. And yet, this woman stopped about 6 feet away and sat down. She didn't seem the least bit bothered. You should go, I said. Don't get sick. I will not get sick, she said. So that is not going to be a problem. You could get sick, I mumbled. It could kill. No, she smiled. That will not be an issue. She got up, scooched closer, and sat across from me. I tried to crawl back, but I couldn't get my arms to move. Sore was reaching into my brain. I could feel it. I could hear the roots crackling as they physically wrapped around my brain stem. It wouldn't let me control myself again. Did you come here to get help? She asked. No, to away. Don't, sick. Really? Even now, that is what you are thinking about. Don't get. I couldn't finish my sentence. My head hung low, as a weight fell on my neck. She put her hand on my chin and lifted me up to look at her. Look, sweetie, she said. I cannot tell a lie. So what I am saying is not just comfort, it is what is going to be, understand? I tried to nod at her, but I couldn't. This thing will not kill you, she continued. It will not control you. You will not infect anyone. I promise, that is not gonna happen. It cannot happen. She wiped a tear from my eye with her thumb. My tear was a light blue. You will feel better in the morning, she smiled. Here. And try to remember the nice human lady with the kaftan who helped you, yes. She handed me a handkerchief, gave me a kiss on the cheek, and wandered off down the road. I closed my eyes, listening for her footsteps to disappear. I must have sat there for hours. All night. At the crack of dawn, I found myself still sitting in the middle of the road, clutching a handkerchief with a little blue sunflower on it. My legs had long since fallen asleep. I was hungry and tired. Dirty as all hell. I could feel something dried on my face, leaving scabs and flakes to be picked off. I closed my eyes, testing myself to see if I was really okay. I thought about the show Family Matters again. It was a good measuring tape. Carl Winslow was the dad. Harriet was the mom. Laura and Eddie were the kids. Then, I couldn't help but laugh. Urkel, I chuckled. Steve Urkel. It was all there. All the little bits and bobs from the back of my mind. I was really feeling better, like the lady had said I would. I don't know how she did it, or why. I could still feel something inside, but I was in control. I could keep it down. I could breathe, and there was no pain. Not even a threat of pain. It won't kill me, I muttered. It won't infect. I don't know how to describe it. I believed her. It felt true. I don't know how it could be, but it was. I was certain of it. I stumbled my way back to my car, closed the door, and put on my seat belt. There were these splashes of blue across the dashboard from where the white strands had touched. I must have been hours, maybe minutes away from falling under the influence of that thing, like Adam. But where he'd lost his mind, I'd gotten a strange second wind. Maybe it was like Nick had said, that it was just the sickness taking its course. But I don't think that's it. I think what saved me that night was a chance encounter with a woman from St. Gall. First thing I did was call him. It just took 2 signals. I'm better, I said. I think it's gonna be okay. You fixed it. Kinda. How? There was a lady, Anne. I looked down at the handkerchief with the blue sunflower and laughed a little at myself. It was such a stupid moment, but it was so relieving. And Steve Urkel, I guess. Are you drunk? I'm sure as hell gonna be. I hung up and watched the Minnesota sun come up over the horizon. I'd made it through the night. There might be more trouble down the road, but for now, I was okay. But in that moment, I just had to sit for a while. Strange how I can't, to this day, picture what that lady really looked like. I know she was a nice lady with a blue kaftan, but there's no detail. There's nothing really there. It's just the words, and what I remember feeling. But that don't make me any less thankful.